to the divisions relatively in terms of the average of the people who've been here. And she's working under rapid appraisal for consumer rice preference in South and Southeast Asia and the stock survey of value chain actors in the Philippines. She will be sharing with us their preliminary results of the consumer survey. So without further ado, I give the floor to Claire. Thank you, Manu.
And good morning, everyone. And thank you so much for uh, coming here and for listening to this division seminar. So for the next 40 to 45 minutes, I'll be presenting the initial findings of our consumer surveys. These were done in urban zones in key cities in South and Southeast Asia. But first, let's see where we are in the scheme of things. This consumer survey or this endeavor fits into IRRI's new breeding structure, whereby market research and um, market segmentation aims to guide breeding priorities. So understanding consumer preferences is important um, in terms of, it is important in implementation of product-oriented or product it is important in implementation of market-driven and product-oriented rice variety development pipelines. Project-wise, we are involved in the TRB project, and this project is focusing on South Asia, particularly India and Bangladesh. But the coverage of our surveys is wider than South Asia. So we have countries in Southeast Asia as well. So for TRB, we are under Objective 1, and the result of the consumer survey falls into the first, one of the key milestones of the project. Okay, so how can we make our research more market-oriented? If we look at the market on one end and IRRI on the other side, we can make our research more market-oriented by learning from the market, looking at consumer preferences along with the purchases and purchase habits and consumption habits, looking at the demand, market segments in the market, and looking at constraints and opportunities and identifying if there's any gap to fill. So the focus or the consumer survey results falls into this first link, learning from the market. And there's a second link. Once we have that knowledge, current knowledge of the market and looking at the trends and the segments, then in the long run, we can utilize this knowledge base to make rice markets more R&D driven, testing new products, marketing strategies if that's part of the objective. And if in the future one of the strategies is to alter preferences or purchase behavior, then the knowledge that we gathered from the first link would be very important in that role. So, since May 2013 until February of this year, consumer surveys were conducted in 7 countries, 24 key cities, plus 2 rural states in India. So for Southeast Asia, the countries covered were Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, and Cambodia. In South Asia, countries covered are India and Bangladesh. It's rapid appraisal, so the coverage is very wide. Our interview length averaged 1 hour and 15 minutes, and we have several topics in the questionnaire from questions on the importance of rice, consumption questions, purchase questions, preferences, their perception on the different quality grades or the quality continuum, and so on. But I will not talk about all of this morning because I think it will take me 2 days if we will discuss all of it. So for today, we'll focus on 3 main things. We'll look at the consumer habits, particularly the consumption, just the key questions, consumption and purchase. And we'll spend more time on the most preferred rice characteristics and comparison across different locations and different segments. And we'll also look at the interesting stories for each country or the country highlights. So bear in mind that these are initial findings. So we'll just look at similarities and differences across cities, at city level, and socioeconomic classes for some cases. But before we go to that, to the results, let me just quickly go through the design on how the surveys were implemented. So the target respondents are male, females, broad age group or broad age 18 to 64 years old and across different socioeconomic classes. We employed a random sampling approach. So for each city, primary sampling units were randomly selected. So for instance, the primary sampling unit or PSU in the Philippines would be the barangay. In Vietnam, it would be the wards. But aside from that, the main criteria that we have for the survey to ensure relevance of their responses, the respondents should be at least involved in grocery decision-making purchase, at least an involvement, or they can be the main decision maker in grocery purchase for the household. And they should be involved in cooking or preparation of the meals for the household. So the objective of this, why we have these two main criteria, is to ensure the relevance of the responses. Sorry. Okay. So I'm talking about PSU. So for each PSU or primary sampling unit, the starting point was determined usually for example, for most countries, there will be a prominent establishment. For example, in Bangladesh, the starting point for one PSU would be the mosque or a school. In an example in the Philippines would be a barangay health center as the starting point, and then we go right coverage rule. So the next household would be the one first to knock, and then after every successful interview, we skip 3 or 4 households depending on the practice in the country. It's just three households before we knock on the next household. And in the event that more than one household qualified, then the respondent was randomly selected either through the last birthday method or through Kish click. So interviews were conducted face-to-face using pen and paper structured questionnaire. We had a standard questionnaire across different locations so that we can compare the result across countries and across segments. But the questionnaires were translated into local language. So in the development of the questionnaire, our team consulted the key readers, if I may put it that way. And questions include spontaneous and aided questions. And for those aided questions, we used visual stimuli or what we call show cards. Okay, so for field work, the field work and data processing was outsourced through a market research firm. For each country, fieldwork duration, the actual fieldwork duration lasted for 2 to 2.5 weeks. But of course, there's a separate timeline for setup and for data processing and the next steps of the process. But as I mentioned, we outsourced this to a market research firm. But even if it's outsourced, we ensure that our team is on every step of the way, from setup up to fieldwork monitoring, quality control monitoring, and data verification and validation. So all in all, we had more than 4,500 respondents, mostly females aged 80 to 64 years old across different SEC or socioeconomic classes. Currently, we have available data for 6 countries. Philippines, first 4 cities in India, Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Bangladesh. Data for Cambodia we're still processing data for Cambodia and the additional cities and rural states in East India. If you can see, the sample size even at city level is very robust with low margin of error. So I've mentioned also that this is part of IRRI and we're focusing on South Asia. So we added additional cities in the east. Once we have all the data, we'll have different segments in India: urban south, urban east, and rural east, so that we can have a comparison across these different segments. So bear in mind that for this presentation, when I talk about India, we're only looking at the first 4 key cities. When I mentioned later that it's urban south, so it's composed of these 3 cities in the south: Chennai, Erode, and Hyderabad. And then urban east for this particular presentation would only refer to Kolkata in West Bengal. Okay, so data was weighted to correct distributions and to represent sample data to target population based on population size of the urban zones that we're representing and socioeconomic class distribution. So for example, in the Philippines, our surveys were conducted in Metro Manila, Cebu City, and Davao City. For Metro Manila, since it's the biggest metropolitan, the data would represent itself. In Cebu and Davao, our data would represent the urban zones in the Visayas and in Mindanao. Another example is in Vietnam. The sites or the survey sites were in Ho Chi Minh and Hanoi, but data representation would include the urban zones in the south for Ho Chi Minh and urban zones in the north for the Hanoi data. And in South Asia, in India, we've covered large metropolitans, Chennai, Hyderabad, and Kolkata. So the data would represent these large cities. But in IRRI, the data would represent cluster of towns with 500,000 to 4 million population in the state of Tamil Nadu. Bangladesh, the survey sites were at district level, Dhaka, Chittagong, and Khulna, but the data would represent the urban zones at the division level. Okay, so who are our respondents? What's their profile? Most of the respondents that we talked to are main grocery decision makers and involved in meal preparation or cooking for the household. So meaning they are the actual persons in the household deciding what to purchase for the household in terms of grocery items. And majority are females. But we can see that we can do some gender disaggregate analysis later on, particularly in the Philippines, in Thailand, and in East India. Average age is 40 to 42 in Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, and India, and slightly younger in Bangladesh and in Indonesia. For education, majority reached high school in Indonesia, Vietnam, India, and Bangladesh. In the Philippines, also a quarter reached the university level. And it's interesting here in Thailand that it's very diverse. A third reached primary school. Another third would be reached high school, and a quarter reached the university level. Most of our respondents were housewives, except in Thailand, wherein about 60% are also working full-time. In Vietnam, almost a third are also working full-time. Monthly household income, or average household income on a monthly basis, those families with income above $400 are in the Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, and Bangladesh, and below that, families in Indonesia and East India. Bangladesh's average is high. I'll have a slide on that one. And average household size in all countries except Philippines is 4 people in the household. In the Philippines, the average household size is 5 people in the household. Yes. Okay, so back to Bangladesh with a high average income. That was pulled by the outliers who fall into the high income bracket. But if you can look at the lower income bracket, majority of the families would fall below the $400 average income. Okay, let's now go to the results. First, by looking at consumption and purchase habits of our urban consumers. But before we look at the results, I'll show you something that we did around in the division to see how diverse habits are even within our division. So these questions are the actual questions that we asked in the survey. So for this part, we asked 2 questions. And the first question is this. Thinking about the past 6 months, how frequent does your family eat rice or rice dishes on average at home?
I would say maybe once a month.
Once a month?
Twice a week, regular.
And thinking about the past 6 months, on which occasions did your family usually eat rice at home? Lunch? Dinner?
Lunch and dinner. Definitely breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Okay. So that's a quick mini survey that we've done around. Okay, so what are the numbers? Let's look at the numbers. Okay. At family level and even at per capita level, the highest consumption would be from the Philippines, families in the Philippines, at both family level and per capita level, while the lowest is Thailand. Now, another way of looking at consumption data is to look at the quantity consumed per capita per eating occasion every time they eat a meal. And we calculated that by also looking at the frequency of consumption per month. So frequency of consumption, we have a question on how often does your family consume rice. So interesting results here. In the Philippines and in Indonesia, even though at family level we have high consumption and frequent consumption, but in every occasion Filipinos eat less as compared to those in Vietnam, India, and Bangladesh. In Thailand, it's both low quantity and less often in terms of frequency. Let's further look at frequency of consumption. In the Philippines and in Indonesia, majority consume rice. This is family cost. This is for the family. 3 times a day. So breakfast, lunch, and dinner. In Thailand, average is twice a day, 14 times a week, mostly during breakfast and dinner. Now we have a very small percentage for lunch, and if you remember in the respondent profile, I highlighted that I think about 60% of the respondents are also working full time. So family would eat out, I guess, for in Thailand. In Vietnam, majority twice a day, lunch and dinner. I checked from our Vietnamese colleague here that in Vietnam, majority of families would eat out during breakfast. It can be noodles or pho, sticky rice or cakes or porridge. In East India and in Bangladesh, majority of families consume rice twice a day. In Bangladesh, I also checked with Saidur. So they eat lunch and dinner. So for breakfast, Bangladeshi families consume bread during breakfast and not really rice. So whether it's at home or outside home, they consume bread for breakfast. Okay. Where do urban consumers purchase their rice for household consumption? In the Philippines and in Indonesia, families purchase rice from the traditional convenience stores. So for us, this would be the sari-sari stores. Indonesia, these are the neighborhood shops. And also from the wet markets. Thailand is very diverse. So we have hypermarket, particularly in Bangkok and in Chiang Mai in the north and in the upper socioeconomic class. And also grocery stores. So these are usually local family-owned stores. In Vietnam, rice dealers, majority would purchase from rice dealers. Also in India, from rice wholesalers. And in Bangladesh, grocery or provision stores. Do families purchase loose rice or packaged rice? Loose rice, it's something that you can buy in portion. Something like if you go to a sari-sari store, you would say, Ate, can I buy half kilo of this and half kilo of that kind of rice? So that's loose rice. Packaged rice is already pre-packed. Like it comes in 5 kg, 5 kg, 1 kg or 5 kg pre-packed. Okay, so loose rice is prominently purchased in the Philippines and in Vietnam. Purchase of packaged rice is very prominent in Thailand and in Bangladesh. Okay, so most preferred rice characteristics. This is one of the key outputs that we want to get out of this consumer survey. How did we get this information or this data? We have this question, how would you describe the traits or characteristics of rice which your family prefers? And we focused on quality traits. Price was not factored in the preference for this survey because our objective is to provide characteristics for our breeders. So we focused on eating quality, physical characteristics, nutritional benefits, and cooking quality. Trade-offs are also not yet captured in this survey. That's part of the future activities of the team. So spontaneous elicitation. This is an effective way of eliciting information if we want to get, if I may say, pure responses. In a sense that as a respondent, I am not limited or I am not aided by the predefined responses of the researchers or what the researchers had said. But even if it's spontaneous elicitation, once the respondent mentioned something about size or shape, we verified by using visual stimuli. The purpose is to get a common point of reference. So if if a respondent from Indonesia would say short, it's the same short, kind of short for those in India. So that's the purpose. Okay, let's go back to our respondents in SSD and see whether the preferences vary or is it similar.
Some of the good things.
I usually go with brown rice.
So that's the most important.
Yeah, brown rice or red rice.
Why would that be important?
Mostly because of the health benefits.
Okay.
Fiber content. Cooking quality is more important. You might reserve, you reheat it, the rice still be good.
What do you mean by cook? When you reheat it, what would be, what's the
What is-
expectation?
It's still soft, you know,
Still
you can
soft.
warm it up in the microwave.
Okay.
Doesn't get hard.
Okay, most important is the taste. Next would be the texture. And when you say texture, what kind of texture are we talking about? Not hard, but and the third one would be color. And what would be the preferred color? White. White. The whiter, the preferred color should be white. Aroma, this would be the second. But how can you describe the aroma that you're buying? My family likes the pandan and rice. So texture. Texture. So can you describe the texture? We like rice that's soft, non-sticky, but has almost a gummy feel. So that's a combination, or that's the whole description. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so even among these four people, preferences vary. So let's look at the results. Let's first go to Southeast Asia. In Southeast Asia, one of the common characteristics preferred in these four countries at country level is color white. And texture is also preferred. However, the type of texture varies by country. So in the Philippines, Filipinos like soft texture. You agree? Yes. Okay. In Vietnam, they also prefer soft. But they also prefer sticky and chewy as as a combination. Not only sticky, not only chewy, but as a combination, sticky and chewy. In Thailand, they prefer smooth texture of rice. In Indonesia, the preference is in English, as we've translated for now, is called mellow, but in the local language, it's called nasinya pulit. So it's a combination of soft, chewy, and not sticky. Okay, so that's for Southeast Asia. Let's go to South Asia. In Bangladesh, at aggregate level, the most preferred rice characteristics would be good taste, white color, and slender shape. If you notice, in the three urban zones that we've covered, it's consistent, slender, white, good taste. In Dhaka, short size is also preferred. In Chittagong, sweet aroma is also preferred, as well as the nutritional benefits, specifically vitamin content. In India, at aggregate level, again, for India, we're only looking for now at the four urban zones. So at aggregate level, medium size, slender shape, white color, and good taste. Now, in India, the importance of size and shape becomes very prominent as compared to counterparts in Southeast Asia, wherein texture was the prominent characteristics that they prefer. If we look at India East, bearing in mind that for now this is only Kolkata, versus the South, size and shape combination is consistent, medium slender. In the South, also medium slender. But if we will look at it on a statewise comparison, medium slender, yes, for West Bengal, Andhra Pradesh, but in Tamil Nadu, the preference is long to extra long rice, but also slender in shape. And also here in South Asia, we've seen that aroma is also a preferred characteristic, particularly sweet aroma in Calcutta and also in Chittagong. So the data is telling us that aroma is a preferred characteristic. However, using a survey as a methodology in eliciting the specific aroma, that proved to be a challenge, and we need to verify this or to elicit the specific aroma for that is preferred for these regions using perhaps other methodology for sensory evaluation. Okay, let's go to country highlights. So what are the interesting stories in the countries that we've covered? Let's look at India. We have the East and the South, and disaggregate by different socioeconomic classes. So as I've mentioned, preference for specific size and shape becomes very evident. In the East, medium slender is pretty much consistent across different socioeconomic classes. But you can see here that in the South, for the upper class, the preferred size is long to extra long, and they both prefer slender shape and medium shape rice. Zooming into East India, we also have a question on the preferred or what are their preferred dishes to eat with rice. And favorite dishes in East India is pulao and vegetable fried rice. The general preference for size is medium, but for these particular dishes, the preference is for long grains. So preference for size in East India, to be particular, can be also dish specific. And we've mentioned about aroma. So again, we prefer aromatic rice for these particular dishes. But if you will look closely at the ingredients of these dishes, it has masala and spices and jaggery or sugar, which the respondents or the consumers might have associated the sweet taste rather than with the rice. So that is something that we further need to investigate and verify. Okay. So in a country wherein medium slender or long slender grains are very prominent, is there a potential market for short and bold grains? So by looking at the dishes that they prefer, the answer is yes, there is a potential. There's an opportunity because of those who consume payesh. The consumers prefer short and bold grains for this particular dish. Payesh is milk-based sweet, and it is an auspicious food and usually prepared and eaten during religious rituals in India. Okay, let's go to Bangladesh. Earlier I said that across the different urban zones, the preferences or the characteristics are consistent. And if you will also look by different socioeconomic classes, it's also consistent. We have slender, good taste, and white grains. For SECC, they also prefer sweet aroma and short grains. Let's fly back to Southeast Asia in Thailand. Two things that I want to highlight here in Thailand. The opportunity or the segment which prefers volume expansion as a characteristic of rice, as well as different association of aroma. Let's go to the first. For the volume expansion, there's a particular segment in the population in Thailand which prefer this specific characteristic. So who are these? These are the families in SECB and in the middle class, wherein almost half of urban families belong to. So volume expansion, or the grains expand in volume after cooking. So that is one segment wherein we can focus on, or it's an opportunity for this trade. Next, sweet and new harvest. So it's a different association of aroma. It's not very clear whether it's really different or it's just that the consumers have, just perceive it differently. Because for sweet aroma, families in SECA prefer that one. SECA, B, and also C. But also in SECC, there are families who also prefer newly harvested aroma. So this is something that we need to verify through sensory evaluation. Okay, let's fly back home in the Philippines. So, how do Filipinos refer to rice? How do they call it when they buy it? Is it by brand name, by variety, by trade name, or by type? So, for Filipinos, 100% of the respondents are aware of the varieties and almost universal for type and also majority for brand name and trade name. So, what are these? And first, how did we get this awareness? So awareness level is composed of 3 questions. The top of mind, the other mentions, and aided awareness. These are 3 questions. So when we ask what types or brands or varieties of rice are you aware of? Have you seen or heard of? So the first mention would be the top of mind. So that can be interpreted as the most salient. Other mentions, the other responses that they mention after top of mind. And we have predefined responses, and after getting those 2 spontaneous responses, we aided them and asked, are you aware of this, 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 this? And the total of that is our total awareness. So in the Philippines, to notice here that urban consumers are aware of the traditional variety names. But we know that these are no longer grown in the country, Sinandoming and Dinorado specifically. So we also conducted value chain surveys with the other value chain actors and gathered that retailers label their rice who have similar characteristics as the traditional variety. So they label it Sinandoming and Dinorado. Other varieties that our consumers are aware, Milagrosa, Angelica, Seven Tonner, Dinorado, the red one, and IR 64, 16%. Consumers are also aware of brown rice, jasmine rice, red rice, and organic. So just remember, these are all just awareness, not consumption. So these are just awareness. So there are many brand names in the market that consumers recall. So we have some Paguita, long grains, and so on and so forth. By trade name, we have Ganador, NFA Rice falls here, NFA and Banay Banay in Mindanao part. Still in the Philippines, one of the questions here, do consumers eat or do Filipinos eat what they prefer? The answer is it's not always the case. So how did we derive to that conclusion? Look at here, this is the awareness level as I've mentioned earlier, the total awareness. And next to awareness level, we have a question on which of these do you consume most often. So we can translate this as the regular usage. And so 91%, for example, who are aware of Sinandoming, 29% are consuming it most often. So 32% of those who are aware consume it. And if we look at those regular users, we ask if you'll not think about the price, what's your preferred brand, type, or variety? And only 60% prefer the same variety as the one that they regularly use. So it's not always the case that they eat what they prefer. Same goes for Angelica, only 55%. Okay. So this is also interesting finding in the Philippines. Seven Tonner has high equity in Davao particularly. It has relatively low awareness at total level, but in Davao, we have 92% awareness. So almost all urban consumers are aware. They know what 7-tonner is. 72% consume it most often. And those who consume it, they also prefer it. So 7-tonner has high equity in this particular urban zone. And this is the last question for the Philippines. Which market segment is topped by jasmine? So we've seen awareness level earlier of jasmine rice among Filipino consumers. Yeah, 67%, but only 6% consume it most often. So where are they located? They're from Metro Manila in the upper class, socioeconomic class, ABC plus. So, and also high preference among this, in this SEC class. Let's go to Vietnam. In Vietnam, so question, who are the market players, at least from the consumer standpoint? If you look at the most often consumed figures here, in Ho Chi Minh City, we can see that there's no dominant player from the consumer standpoint in terms of the regular usage of their families. But in Hanoi, this variety back home uh, is appearing to be a very prominent player in Hanoi. Okay, so that's it. For just to summarize what I've been presenting these past minutes. So the most preferred rice characteristics vary by country, except for whiteness. In Southeast Asia, whiteness and texture are the preferred characteristics, but the type of texture differs per country. In South Asia, the common characteristics preferred are whiteness and good taste. In Bangladesh, it's consistent across the different urban zones and across different socio-economic classes. In East India, we've seen the importance of size and shape being more prominent or evident as compared to Southeast Asian countries. And also, we've seen that preference in India is most diverse. It varies by state, by SEC, and even by dish. Opportunities also exist in specific segments. So we've seen in India that there's a potential for short and bold grains for those who consume or those who prepare payesh for their families. In Thailand, grain expansion for the middle class is an opportunity. In the Philippines, jasmine is preferred by upper class in Metro Manila. Now, the very controversial aroma is preferred, but we need to verify which specific aroma is preferred in the different location. So, sweet aroma from the survey, seeing that it's unclear if association pertains to the dish or to the rice itself. So, this is something that we need to verify. And Thai consumers have different association of aroma, and again, we need to further verify that one. So results of this consumer survey, it brings us one step closer to providing inputs to breeders in their development of product profiles by region. And we need few more steps to get there. We need to, this is part of the future plans, trade-offs to be examined, agronomic traits versus grain quality to facilitate prioritization in varietal development. And we also need to determine the demand for grain quality traits. And the result of this consumer survey is also an important input to broader value chain analysis that we're doing, because our team also conducted stock surveys on the different value chain actors. So next steps. For this year, we need to do further data analysis of the data that we have and still to come. And look at cross-country comparisons as well. We're also planning to do rural consumer surveys in Bangladesh and next year additional rural surveys in India. For the country reports that we're looking at, we need to link or look at the linkages among the value chain actors, the preferences from the producers to the consumers. And opportunities, issues, constraints, technical gaps, and also cross-cutting research themes impacting preferences. Okay, so for TRB, for 2014, as I mentioned, rural survey in Bangladesh and other states in India next year. And for the other value chain actor survey, we'll be doing the stock survey in Bangladesh in a couple of weeks. Yep, and that's it. Thank you so much for listening. This is us working and playing. Thank you.
Any questions, Claire?
Correct me if I'm wrong. You only get rural samples from rural areas in India,
Yes.
and all others are in urban. What is the percentage of urban and rural population in the countries where you conducted your survey? Is it more urban or more rural? To represent your results per country.
I'm the exact figures are not at the top of my head right now, but a large portion are in urban areas.
In the Philippines, is population?
Population.
Philippines is
I
39% is rural in Philippines. It's the only country where more trees there than
How do you
while
classify?
Cambodia 83% in
Yeah.
rural.
Still, there is still a portion that is rural, 39%. That is still significant comparing to your sample. Why did you not take sample from rural areas? Because their consumption habits might be
Yes.
different, their preferences might be different. Then another question, I cannot really comprehend why you excluded price. Because it's a very big factor in the consumer, particularly in areas where the income is low. They will sacrifice quality or even for price. So how do you really totally disassociate price with your survey?
So for the first one, um, I I agree that preferences vary or may vary between urban and rural zones, and that's the reason why we added rural surveys and still plan to add rural sites in India as a priority country so that we can compare what or look at the differences in terms of preferences between urban and rural. For the other countries, for Southeast Asia, urban zones are prioritized for the first year of our activities because that's also where the demand would come from. So from the production zones to the urban zones where consumption is high. For the second one, in terms of price, um, we did not include price in the question for the particular question that I showed earlier in eliciting the preferred characteristics because the one of the key objectives is to provide quality traits. So we're focusing on that one. But yes, price is very important in terms of preferences. They can sacrifice one trait. And that's why we're planning to do trade-off analysis as part of our future activities. And with the current data set, we can also look at the varieties that they consume and they prefer. And the other way around, whether what they prefer is also what they consume and look at determine whether the prices are different for those varieties.
I have one question and one suggestion. It's up to you, whichever you want to take first. Okay, question first. Going to that, what she also mentioned a little bit, and in your result slide, like take home message or something, that this is mostly for the breeders. Okay, if we go blindly with your recommendation, okay, and something goes wrong, how much accountability you are ready to take? Because why I am telling this, there is a little bit divide in that. Say for example, I think you mentioned something on Indonesia on Monday. I don't know there also, aroma. Because in Indonesia, aroma is not needed because that is the only breeding program which I am handling in Southeast Asia. They don't like aroma. While in the urban market, if you go to supermarket, you will find high rise and this thing, and then there are few more there. Pandanwagi, yeah, that's there. But usually it's not aroma. So if I am diverting my program with aromatic, and nobody takes the farmers like in the field or in the interior. So that's how much accountability you can take for that.
Also in the key takeout slides, I've mentioned that this is not the end result yet. These are initial results. We need few more steps to get there because we know that the objective is to prioritize the traits and not get this result blindly and revise or update the entire breeding program. So there are a few more steps that I've mentioned that we still need to do to be able to provide prioritization for the breeders. For the aroma in Indonesia, yes, we plan to talk to you about that one. And, one thing that we can do for now is to look at the preferred varieties in those, specifically it's from Jakarta and Surabaya, not really in Medan. To look at the preferred varieties in those urban zones and see whether they are aromatic or not. And we can discuss further afterwards on that.
I think if we can include the because there is a very good census in Indonesia, I gave to Alice also, where you can find the area planted under which variety. So that if something is coming in the urban area, it must be coming from the farmer's field, somewhere else, or maybe somewhere import, definitely from the Jasmine rice. But if the area, say for example, in Cherang it's more than 54% now, it's a single variety, it means that's not aromatic. You put the aroma in that, they say, I don't want that. So it means there is a strong dispreference for that aroma. This is just one. So I think we should work together before we finalize something. So one suggestion. On East India as well as in Chennai, I think I discussed on that day also. If you take in your data, did you also put that condition that the respondent one, is it a native or is he shifted from not, because out of 5 countries, 4 countries are natural rice lover and eaters. India is not. South India, yes, rice. North India, no rice. So if it's like a native, then probably they will look for the medium slender and rice. But if it is a outsider, like me, from North India to Chennai, I will look for the long slender.
That question was not included in the question.
Yeah. So if the natives are there, and probably if you will partition your data native versus non-native, I think you will get some little bit different result. This I'm sure.
Okay. So
This is my suggestion.
thank you. Thank you, Arthur.
Did you get info on rice expenditures?
Yes, we have. Yes, we have.
Then you can derive unit values to represent prices in, in your analysis.
Dr. Mataleb asked me to add that question.
Okay.
So,
Secondly, I have some reservations on delaying your rural survey. Simply because the structure, the consumption structure might have already changed if you delay it in comparison with the urban samples. So you should have, you should get a very good correction factor for that. Okay.
Okay.
I asked you lots of questions yesterday, so I'll just make some comments today. In terms of the urban and rural timing of the surveys, I think we should not consider these to be a one-shot exercise. They should be repeated at different intervals to capture the change. Why the focus on urban in this first round? Well, I think if you look over 50 years of IRRI's research, we haven't focused enough on the urban consumption and preference part. So this fills a gap. It's a starting point. Now we have done some. It's not that we haven't done any, but we have focused on our main targets as being poor, rural, smallholders, and that's where we have most of our knowledge. So I think this adds quite a bit, even if there still needs to be a lot of interpretation and a lot of context in what you presented. I think what you have here is perhaps a framework where we can start to discuss a lot more with people like RK and others who have a lot of knowledge in these different areas to interpret this correctly and bring in a lot of this knowledge which is in people's heads. I think across IRRI we have a lot of great experience and history, but if a donor comes to us with a question and says, tell us all about preferences, we can then say, okay, you need to go and talk to the Gates Foundation today, or we can just go, here's this report, because RK can't be in 10 places at the same time. should these demands come up. So I think it's good to have this as a basis where we can then fill in the gaps, complete the story, and really get a good picture on the different preferences we have across these different segments. And I hope that's something we can really start to pull together, because this is just the start, and you can already see across the audience there are some reservations, comments, queries. What does this really mean? How do we use this and interpret it to forward the briefing program and our other research in the social science division? Lastly, the urban aspect. When IRRI was founded, I think if you look across Asia, the urban population accounted for maybe 10 to 15%. Now it's pushing 50%, and it's only going to get more. It's only going to increase. Now, whether urban consumers eat more rice or less rice than rural consumers, I think we know generally they eat less. They have a wider basket of options to choose from for their diet. But in terms of the number of people, for sure, the urban segment is going to just become more and more important. They have greater purchasing power. They perhaps have a wider diversity of preferences, and it's just increasing. And we have to look at both. I mean, we can't ignore one or the other. And of course, different countries are urbanizing and developing at different paces. Some are already highly urbanized, others, like Cambodia, we heard, still a long way to go. But they're all going in the same direction. So getting a clear picture and keeping going back to these segments, every 5 years or so, I think that's going to really build up a picture of how this is changing. Because it is changing, I think, very, very quickly. Hence the comment of maybe not delaying the rural too far, because even in both those segments, I think things are developing quite rapidly. That was almost as long as your presentation.
Thank you very much for the very good presentation. One comment. In Europe, there's a lot of research done like this on staple products. But research is also shifting, and it's shifting to eating out. A lot of people go out to buy their dinners, and when they go out, they don't decide anymore which rice they choose. They rely on the ones where they go. So it would be very interesting to also have a good feeling in Southeast Asia how much people eat out, eat inside, and who influences which are the main places they go to eat. Because those will be major players in deciding what the preferences will be, or the buying preferences. That's one comment. I had just a comment back to your comment. How do you tell it? How much is she responsible for this data? I just have one short comment on this. I think this is like the first big study that we actually have an ID. So this is